Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, you're welcome. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the easiest way, the simplest way, and the fastest way to understand pattern drafting. You guys know we're about the easy life here on this channel, and I get a lot of, not really a lot, but a lot of people drop comments on videos that I do, maybe patterns, draft the patterns before we go into the main tutorial, or just pure pattern videos. Like, they have issues understanding pattern drafting. They don't know how to draft pattern. They have a really hard time understanding pattern drafting. And I know drafting a pattern is very simple, it's very easy, and when I see people say they have issues with it, it really gets to my heart. So, the good girl that I am, I decided to do a video talking about just easy steps, simple steps to help you understand pattern drafting and to encourage you in your drafting journey. Okay, if you want to find out the easiest way, the fastest way, and the simplest way to draft a pattern, make sure you keep watching. Now, the first thing I always advise a lot of people, if they want to learn how to draft a pattern, or if they want, they just want to dive into the pattern drafting world, I ask them, how good are your, marking skills? How good are your cutting skills, like your freehand cutting skills? Do you know how to easily draw, as in mark out your measurements, shape out your waist, your hips, your bust, your waistline in a blouse? Do you know how to mark out those your measurements on a fabric? I'm coming from the freehand part right now. If you know how to, okay, when you want to cut a skirt, or when you want to cut a blouse, freehand, you know how to shape your neckline, you know how to shape your shoulder lines, do you know how to shape your armhole curve, do you know how to shape your bust line, your waistline? If you know how to do those things, drafting a pattern is just interpreting whatever you do in freehand onto a paper, and probably you do further manipulations and slashing and tearing and spreading out, depending on the style you want to recreate. Okay, so if you want to learn how to draft a pattern, I would advise that you don't just go straight into pattern drafting. Learn how to, draft freehand first. Learn how to cut a basic skirt. Just marking out your measurements on your fabric. Learn how to cut a basic blouse. Learn how to shape your neckline, even like using just your hands without those pattern rulers. Learn how to shape your shoulder lines without those pattern rulers. Just try. It's going to be difficult, but try, because these tricks and the skill, will I say skill? I don't know what to call it, but whatever you are learning at the point of curving your neckline, curving your shoulder lines, your armhole curve, your bust, your waist, it will go a long way to help you draft a perfect pattern. Do you guys understand me? Because if you don't know how to shape out your normal neckline, your normal shoulder line, or know how to interpret different measurements on your fabric, that's I'm coming from the freehand part, you can't just it will be difficult for you to draft a pattern, because first of all, for a pattern you're even drafting like half and placing it on the fabric, so you even get more confused. So my advice to anybody who is having issues understanding pattern drafting is learn freehand cutting first. Learn freehand marking, marking on the fabric, marking on your calico, those your test fabric or real fabrics. Just learn freehand first. When you've mastered freehand, then you can now try out your hands on pattern drafting. I know when you talk about pattern, this is just drafting on a paper. Sometimes when we hear big names, it even confuses our brain the more. Pattern drafting is just drafting on a paper, and that will help you manipulate the style easier and faster and better, compared to when you're working on a fabric directly. You have more manipulation on a pattern than on a fabric. Okay, now the next thing I always tell people, if you want to understand pattern drafting faster, or you want to learn faster, you don't have to buy every single equipment. Some people, they see, okay, pattern master, they buy it, French chiron, they buy it, this one is Italian curve, they buy it, Spanish curve, they buy it, and you don't even know how to shape your waistline to your hip line. It's a waste of equipment. The more, sometimes, if you've not, like, which leads me back to point one, if with freehand, just with the aid of one or two rollers, you didn't learn how to mark on your fabric. Okay, you did not learn how to mark on your fabric or your calico, whatever you are learning to, you are using to learn how to cut or sew at the time. You didn't learn how to mark your waistline, you didn't learn how to mark your hip line down to probably the hem of your skirt or your blouse. You didn't learn how to mark those things. Buying those equipment, they might help you a bit, but you even get confused which to use. Now, if you've been on this channel for the longest time, you would know that I draft my patterns with just two rulers, like the straight transparent ruler and my French curves. You guys must have seen that in a lot of the videos that I've drafted patterns, because to me, pattern drafting is very easy. That doesn't require so much complicated equipment or tools. It's not that getting those equipments are bad, they are not bad, okay, but getting them when you can't use them, when you can't connect just your bust to your waist or your waist to your hips, is a waste of equipment, and it will even confuse you the more when it comes to understanding pattern drafting. So something I always advise a lot of people is learn how to, draft normally, which takes us back to point one. Then start with your basic tools like your normal French curve, your normal ruler. Then when you get better at that, you can now start upgrading your tools. Okay, you can buy a pattern master and those other rulers that are used for pattern drafting. It will help you, trust me, it will help you, because I've seen a lot of people, they have a lot of those things and they don't know how to draft a pattern. Because sometimes, let me just even tell you guys the truth, sometimes you have, especially that ruler that they use for probably connecting the waistline, okay, connecting the waistline to the hip line, you might just curve it in. Okay, you might just use the ruler to draw the shape of the waist to the hips, and by the time you are done sewing, it's having a very funny look. Okay, it's having a very funny look. That's because maybe you do not understand the placement of the ruler, or probably if you are used to drafting with just like basic rulers, you know that okay, I have to adjust it at this point, I have to raise it up at this point. Even if I'm using a pattern ruler, it doesn't mean I cannot readjust my line or slant my line further in. Do you understand me? So even when it comes to learning pattern drafting, I always advise people to start with the basic tools. Okay, you can start with your basic straight ruler and basic French curve. The more you understand, keep buying equipment. If you guys are hearing shukuru shukuru shukuru, I have a neighbor that sews as well, so if you keep hearing chukuru chukuru chukuru, know that somebody is sewing in my compound. Okay, another thing with pattern drafting is, if you want to go into pattern drafting, you're having issues with pattern drafting, the necklines aren't really coming out well, especially when you're using your tools, that's your French, your curves, your rulers, those pattern master, whatever you guys use for drafting your patterns. Okay, one thing I always advise people to do is, if you notice that every single time I draft my pattern with my tools, the necklines don't really come out well, the shoulder lines don't really come out well, it might be that you're not using the rulers appropriately, or you don't really know how to draw the curves and the angles. So which leads me back to point one. If you know how to draft just freehand, like using your chalk or your pencil, depending on what you use to draft on your fabric at that time, that okay, I have to really go in. If this is a circle neckline, I have to really go in, I have to move this way. If it's a square neckline, I have to draw, make sure my v-neck is pointed. That if you're using like what's it called, that if you're doing freehand, by the time you use by the time you go into pattern drafting, even if you are using a ruler, you would know that okay, I want this particular angle, this ruler isn't giving it to me, this is how I will maneuver it to get this particular angle, this particular shape, this particular curve. Do you guys understand me? So first of all, before you go into pattern drafting, make sure you've mastered drawing your angles and your curves. That's your your neckline, your armhole curve, your waist to hip curve. Make sure you've mastered the art of drawing those things perfectly, so that when it comes to pattern drafting, by the time you begin to draft and you see that okay, this pattern is looking funny, you can just adjust it instead of just drafting, and by the time you are done drafting, the pattern is looking funny because the hip line is not properly shaped, the shoulder line is not properly shaped, the armhole curve is not properly shaped, everything just looks woozy and funny. Do you guys understand me? So if you want to go into pattern drafting, another something that will really help you, you know, to understand it better and to make it come out really finer, is to learn your angles and your curves. When you, as in to learn it, to learn how to draft them, learn how to mark them. Let me stop saying draft. Learn how to mark them, okay? Learn how to mark them on your normal fabric. Learn how to mark them, you know, freehand, even if it's with the aids of ruler, okay? Just learn how to mark it properly on your fabric before you now dive fully into pattern drafting. It will help you understand it better. It will help you learn how to manipulate your curves. It will help you learn how to, you know, draw whatever pattern you see, because you know the basic. You know that, okay, whatever it is, the neckline must not go this low, or it must not go this high, the shoulder line must be slanted, the armhole must be really curved. You know, this is how the bust line should look, this is how the waistline should look, this is how the waist to hip line should look. Do you guys understand me now that you've started drafting a pattern? Like, if you start drafting patterns from time to time and you notice that your patterns don't really come out well, by the time you're done drafting the pattern and transferring the pattern to the fabric and sewing, notice that it doesn't really come out well, something I always advise people to do is have like a test fabric. More like, some people use really cheap fabric, some people use this calico or muslin fabric. You know, make sure that when you are done drafting the pattern, you have a test fabric that you test that pattern on, okay? So when you're done testing it, you wear it and you see that, oh, it didn't come out. That's if you're still learning pattern drafting, okay? So you check it, be like, oh, this thing didn't really come out well, the way, like, it didn't really, maybe after sewing you realize that, oh, the waistline was too big, or the hip line was too small, or the waistline was too small, or the hip line was too big. By the time you begin to test your patterns, you know, you get better at drafting, because you like, you think, okay, at the time I was drafting this particular place, this is how I placed my ruler, and that is why the hip came out a little too bulgy, or, you know, it came out a little too slanted, or the waistline came out too tight or too tiny. By the time you begin to test your pattern before you go into main cut, you know that, okay, I need to adjust my pattern at this point, I need to adjust it at this point. You get better with drafting. Do you understand? So something I always advise people to do, especially if you're learning how to draft patterns, is make sure you always test your patterns. Make sure you always test your patterns after drafting. Have like your calico fabric or your muslin fabric, or, you know, any cheap fabric you have at home. Make sure you always test your pattern. By the time you see a mistake, you can go back and correct it on the main pattern, so that the next time you're drafting, you won't make such mistake. You know how to place your rulers, you know how to place your French curve or your pattern master, or whatever you're using to draft, okay? It gets better with each drafting, especially when you point out your mistakes, okay? Now, something I always tell people when it comes to sewing, you guys know I say this every single time here on this channel, is practice. You can't draft one pattern or two patterns and say, oh, pattern drafting is not for me, I don't understand pattern drafting, it doesn't work well for me. No, you have to practice. Do it over and over again. If today you drafted maybe a blouse, it didn't come out well, tomorrow you can try drafting another type of blouse. Just make sure with pattern drafting you know how to draft a basic blouse, a basic skirt, a basic gown. From there you can move to other things. Do you guys understand me? So with pattern drafting, you have to practice and hang in there. Nothing good comes easy, you guys know. When it comes to skills, when it comes to handwork, you have to do it over and over again to master the art. Someone like me, I don't test my patterns anymore, okay, because I've gotten to that point where I really make mistakes with my pattern. And even if I make a mistake, I've learned how to draft my pattern to accommodate, you know, any mistake that I can easily take out when I'm, you know, marking out the final measurements or when I'm sewing. So you see that when it comes to sewing, when it comes to pattern drafting, you get better, you know, with each pattern you draft and with each, you know, sewing project you carry out, okay? So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Let me know in the comment section other tips and tricks that you know you've employed in your pattern drafting journey that has helped you understand pattern drafting better. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you've not subscribed. Check out my other videos and I'll see you in my next. Bye.